Imagine 40,000 of Rome's finest soldiers not falling to the sword, but trapped by a silence so heavy it broke their will. Discover the forgotten day in 321 BC, when an entire army was forced to trade their armor for a walk of total shame, changing the course of an empire forever. Close your eyes and let us travel back to the sun-drenched hills of ancient Italy, where the air was thick with the scent of pine and the looming shadow of an impossible choice. Our story begins in the heat of a summer that Rome would never forget. The dust of Samnium, setting the ancient stage. The year is 321 BC, but in the heart of the Italian peninsula, time feels like a secondary concern. Imagine, if you will, the midsummer heat of the Apennine Mountains. It is a dry, heavy heat that settles over the ridges like a thick blanket. There is no wind here, only the rhythmic, hypnotic sound of the cicadas vibrating in the scrub oaks. Below, the Samnite territory stretches out in a series of repetitive, undulating hills colored in shades of dusty olive and sun-bleached tan. Along the winding mountain paths, a massive column of 40,000 Roman soldiers moves with the slow, deliberate pace of a giant serpent. To look at them from a distance is to see a shimmering line of bronze and crimson snaking through the dust. There is a specific cadence to their march, the rhythmic thud-thud of hobnailed sandals hitting the dry earth, a sound that is continued for hours, days, and weeks. The dust kicked up by 80,000 feet hangs in the air, coating the soldiers' sweaty skin in a fine gray powder, turning their red tunics into a muted, earthy maroon. The air smells of old leather, salt, and the dry herbal scent of crushed wild thyme underfoot. For the Roman legionary, this march is a trance. Each man watches the back of the helmet in front of him, the slight sway of the transverse crest, the glint of the sun off a polished cheek guard. They are not thinking of war today. They are thinking of the weight of their scutum, or shield, on their left shoulder, and the steady, warm slosh of water in their goatskin canteens. The landscape is beautiful, yet monotonous, an endless loop of limestone crags and deep green valleys that seem to swallow the sound of their passing. Here, in the silence of Samnium, the Roman Republic feels invincible, yet the very silence of these ancient hills is beginning to weave a web that 40,000 men are walking into, one slow, dusty step at a time. The ambition of the consuls, a blueprint for disaster. At the head of this massive, winding column ride the two consuls of Rome, Spurius Postumus Albinus and Titus Veturius Calvinus. To hold the office of consul is to hold the highest honor in the Republic, but today that honor feels like a physical weight. As their horses step carefully over the uneven stones, the consuls feel the heavy sway of their palumenta, the thick, purple-bordered cloaks that mark their status. The wool is high quality, dense, and uncomfortably warm against their shoulders, absorbing the relentless midday sun. Postumus adjusts his grip on the reins. His palms are slightly damp inside his leather gloves. He is not thinking of a grand battle. He is thinking of logistics, of the 40,000 mouths that need to be fed, and the pressure from the Senate back in Rome to end this Samnite conflict quickly. Beside him, Calvinus watches the horizon. The ambition of these two men is not loud or aggressive. It is a quiet, persistent hum. It is the desire to return to the eternal city in a chariot, showered in laurel leaves, celebrated as the men who finally tamed the mountain tribes. This ambition clouds their perception of the landscape. To a scout, the narrowing valley ahead might look like a throat waiting to swallow them, but to the consuls, it looks like a shortcut, a way to bypass the grueling mountain climbs and surprise the Samnite army at the city of Luceria. They discuss the route in low, murmuring tones, their voices lost to the clanking of the bronze scales on their armor. Clink, clink, clink. Each movement of their horses produces a rhythmic metallic chime that blends with the ambient noise of the march. They believe they are the hunters, guided by a map of their own making. They do not realize that their plan is not a strategy, but a blueprint for a trap, drawn by their own impatience and the heavy golden dream of a Roman triumph. The shepherds lie, whispers in the tall grass. As the sun begins its slow descent toward the western ridges, casting long, distorted shadows across the valley floor, the Roman vanguard comes to a halt. The sudden stop ripples back through miles of men like a slow-moving wave. In the distance, near a cluster of ancient, gnarled olive trees, a group of men appears. They look unremarkable, just simple shepherds dressed in rough, undyed wool tunics that match the color of the dry earth. They lean on long wooden staffs, their faces shaded by broad-brimmed hats, watching the Roman war machine with an air of quiet indifference. The consuls signal for an interrogation. The shepherds are brought forward, their sandals caked in the pale dust of the Samnite highlands. They do not look like soldiers. They smell of goat's milk, wood smoke, and the outdoors. When they speak, their voices are low and gravelly, carrying the slow, melodic lilt of the mountain folk. They tell a story that the consuls desperately want to hear. The main Samnite army, they claim, is miles away, currently laying siege to the city of Luceria in the plains of Apulia. They are far to the south, one shepherd says, pointing a weathered finger toward the horizon. By the time you reach the pass, they will be too busy with the city walls to notice your shadow. The lie is told with such calm, such mundane simplicity that it bypasses the Romans' natural suspicion. There is no urgency in the shepherd's eyes, only the vacant stare of men who spend their lives watching clouds pass over peaks. Postumus and Calvinus listen, the warm breeze ruffling the hair plumes of their helmets. The air is still, save for the distant, lonely bleating of a stray goat. In this moment of quiet, the trap is set not with swords, but with words, soft, dusty whispers that drift through the tall, golden grass and convince 40,000 soldiers to turn their back on the open road and head straight into the mouth of the canyon.
4. Entering the Fork, the Valley of No Return. The entrance to the Claudine Forks is not a sudden gate, but a gradual tightening of the earth. As the Roman column pivots toward the pass, the wide-open vista of the Italian plains begins to dissolve. The sun, once a blinding presence in the center of the sky, now finds itself blocked by the rising limestone walls of the mountains. The air inside the pass changes instantly. It is cooler, smelling of damp stone, moss, and ancient shadows. The ground beneath the soldiers' feet turns from dusty gravel to a soft, dark loam that muffles the sound of their footsteps. The geometry of the fork is a geographical anomaly. Two narrow, wooded defiles are connected by a central, grassy meadow, a hidden bowl carved into the mountain's heart. As the lead units enter, they find themselves walking between cliffs so steep that the sky is reduced to a thin, bright ribbon of blue far above. The soldiers move in a strange, cathedral-like silence. The chatter of the ranks dies down, replaced by the occasional scrape of a spear against a rock, or the rhythmic creaking of the wooden carts carrying the heavy siege equipment. There is a deceptive beauty here. Ferns cling to the damp crevices of the rock faces, and small, crystal-clear springs trickle down the stone, making a gentle drip, drip, drip sound that echoes in the stillness. But for the veteran soldiers, a subtle unease begins to settle in the pit of their stomachs. The woods on either side are too quiet. There are no birds singing in the branches of the oaks. The wind, which had been a constant companion on the plains, cannot find its way into this deep limestone throat. 40,000 men continue to flow into the meadow, filling the green space like water pouring into a basin, unaware that the geography itself is beginning to act as a cage, slowly closing the door on the world they left behind. 5. The sound of stones. Reality settles in. The vanguard of the Roman column, led by the scouts and the light-armed velites, finally reaches the far end of the meadow. They expect to see the path opening up back toward the sunlit plains of Apulia. Instead, they find a wall. It is not a natural wall, but a frantic, massive fortification of felled trees, jagged boulders, and sharpened stakes, all jammed tightly into the narrowest point of the exit. The path forward is gone. A strange, heavy stillness ripples back through the 4 miles of soldiers. The men in the middle of the column, still walking, begin to bunch up against those in front, like water hitting a dam. The rhythmic thud of sandals stops, replaced by the sound of 40,000 men holding their breath. Then, from the high, inaccessible ridges above them, comes a new sound, the low, grinding rumble of stones being rolled. Massive boulders, moved by the hidden hands of the Samnites, crash down the slopes at the entrance they just passed, sealing the way back. The Romans are now held in a limestone vice. They look up, squinting against the bright glare of the sky, and see the ridges lined with Samnite warriors. These are no longer the shepherds from the grass. These are men in shimmering bronze breastplates, holding spears leveled at the valley floor. There is no shouting, no war cries, only the sight of thousands of enemies looking down at them with predatory patience. The consuls look at each other, the weight of their purple cloaks now feeling like lead. They are not in a battle. They are in a room with no doors, and the walls are made of mountains. 6. 5 days of hunger, the silence of the siege. Inside the stone bowl of the Claudine Forks, time begins to stretch and warp. The first night is the hardest. 40,000 men lie on the cold, damp grass, staring up at a narrow sliver of starlight, waiting for an attack that never comes. The Samnites do not charge. They simply sit on the ridges, their campfires appearing like a ring of mocking stars high above the Roman heads. The only sound is the occasional clatter of a falling pebble or the low, hushed murmurs of soldiers speculating on their fate. As the second and third days pass, the atmosphere becomes heavy with a strange, stagnant lethargy. The Romans' grain supplies, carried in heavy linen sacks on the backs of mules, begin to dwindle. The air, once cool and refreshing, now feels thick and stale, trapped between the limestone walls. There is no wood for large fires, so the nights are spent in a shivering, blue-tinted darkness. The soldiers sit in small circles, their expensive bronze armor becoming dull with oxidation and mountain dew. Hunger is not a sharp pain here, but a dull, rhythmic ache that saps the strength from their limbs and the will from their hearts. By the 5th day, a profound silence has conquered the valley. The horses, weakened by lack of fodder, stand with their heads bowed, their ribs beginning to show through their dusty coats. The Roman pride, the fierce, disciplined energy that built an empire, is slowly evaporating in the heat. Men who were once warriors now look like ghosts, their eyes hollow, their movements slow and ghostly. They are no longer a legion, they are a captive audience to their own slow demise. The realization settles in. They will not die in a glorious clash of shields, but in a quiet, forgotten corner of the mountains, simply because they ran out of bread and space. 7. Gavius Pontius, the general who chose mercy. High above the huddled masses of the Roman legions, Gavius Pontius stood on a limestone ledge, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He was a man of the mountains, weathered, patient, and deeply philosophical. He did not look down at the 40,000 trapped Romans with hatred, but with a profound, quiet curiosity. He knew he held the entire future of Rome in the palm of his hand. If he gave the order, his archers and stone throwers could end the Roman Republic right there in that sun-drenched bowl. Unsure how to handle such a massive victory, Pontius sent a messenger to his father, Hyrenius, a man renowned for his wisdom. The old man's advice arrived in two extreme parts. He whispered, either kill them all and remove the threat forever, or let them all go, unharmed and with their honor intact, to earn their eternal friendship. Pontius, however, found himself trapped in the middle. He sought a third path, a way to humiliate Rome without slaughtering them, a decision that would haunt both nations for centuries. The Samnite leader watched as the Roman envoys finally climbed the steep paths to beg for terms. The air was still, the only sound the rustle of the wind through the pines. Pontius spoke in a voice that was calm and rhythmic, matching the slow pulse of the mountains. He told the Romans they would live, but at a price that would sting worse than death. He wasn't just asking for their land or their gold, he was asking for their dignity. As he laid out his terms, the sun began to set, casting long purple shadows over the valley, mirroring the dark, cold weight of the shame that was about to be unleashed. 8. The Yoke of Shame, a walk beneath the spear. The morning of the surrender arrived with a pale, sickly light. There was no fanfare, no beating of drums, only the sound of 40,000 men being stripped. The Samnites demanded that every Roman, from the high-ranking consuls to the youngest legionary, remove their armor. The heavy bronze breastplates, the sturdy red tunics, and the iconic helmets were piled into great clashing mounds of metal. For the first time in their lives, the soldiers felt the cool mountain air directly on their bare skin, leaving them feeling small, exposed, and profoundly human. In the center of the exit, the Samnites had constructed the jugum. It was a simple, cruel structure. 2 spears driven upright into the earth, with a third spear tied horizontally across them at chest height. To exit the valley, every single Roman had to bend their body, bowing low to pass beneath the crossbar. It was a physical manifestation of submission, a ritual usually reserved for oxen or conquered slaves. One by one, the line began to move. The consuls went first, their heads bowed, their eyes fixed on the dirt beneath their feet. As they passed under the spear, the Samnite soldiers lined the slopes, watching in a silence that was more deafening than any insult. There were no cheers from the victors, only the rhythmic shuffling sound of 80,000 bare feet on the stones. For the Roman soldier, whose entire identity was built on the unyielding strength of the Republic, this walk was a slow-motion nightmare. Each man who ducked under that spear felt the invisible weight of the yoke settle onto his soul, a burden they would carry long after they left the shadows of the mountains behind. 9. The Long March Home, Shadows of Rome. The march back to Rome was a journey of ghosts. There was no rhythmic chanting of victory songs, no rhythmic clashing of shields against their thighs. Instead, there was only the soft, repetitive shuffling of feet on the Appian Way. The 40,000 men moved like a slow gray mist flowing across the Italian landscape. They avoided the main roads where they could, sticking to the shadows of the forests and the edges of the fields, as if the very light of the sun was a witness to their disgrace. When the news finally reached Rome, the city didn't erupt in chaos. It fell into a deep, unnatural slumber of its own. The shops closed their heavy wooden shutters. The courts of law, usually buzzing with the sharp, melodic arguments of orators, went silent. The Senate sat in a dark chamber, the air thick with the smell of guttering oil lamps and the damp scent of the Tiber River. There were no fires lit for celebration, and the usual evening clamor of the Roman streets was replaced by a heavy, expectant stillness. As the soldiers finally approached the city gates, they did not look like the world conquerors they were meant to be. They entered in the middle of the night, slipping through the portals like thieves. They did not go to their homes to embrace their families. Instead, they dispersed into the dark alleys, their heads still bowed, as if the wooden spear of the Samnite yoke was still hovering just inches above their necks. The city of Rome, for the first time in its history, felt small. The heartbeat of the Republic had slowed to a faint, rhythmic throb, buried under the crushing weight of a silence that was far louder than the roar of any battle. 10. Echoes in the Canyon, the eternal lesson. The silence of the Claudine Forks did not stay in the mountains. It followed the Romans into their temples, their homes, and their future. History often remembers the great explosions of fire and steel, but the lesson of the year 321 BC was one of quiet, cold steeling of the will. Rome did not forget. The memory of the yoke became a rhythmic pulse in the back of the Roman mind, a reminder that survival is not the same as honor, and that a wound to the pride is harder to heal than a wound to the flesh. The Samnites had hoped that by sparing the Romans they would secure a lasting peace through gratitude, but they had misunderstood the Roman spirit. The Republic did not feel gratitude, it felt a slow burning, patient fire. In the years that followed, the Roman military machine was rebuilt with a new, obsessive focus. They returned to the mountains not with the arrogance of the consuls, but with the cold, methodical precision of a people who refused to ever bend their necks again. The boring reality of history is that great empires are often built not on their easy victories, but on the quiet, agonizing nights spent contemplating their greatest shames. Today, if you visit the valley between Arienzo and Arpaia, the air is still. The limestone cliffs remain, ancient and indifferent, watching the modern world pass by. The cicadas still vibrate in the trees, and the wind still whispers through the tall grass. There are no monuments to the 40,000 who walked beneath the spear, yet their story remains etched into the very silence of the landscape. It is a reminder that even the mightiest can be brought low by a simple lie and a narrow path, and that the echoes of a quiet humiliation can change the course of the world forever.